Hi everyone, this is Mindy Egan for lawnfawn, and today we are going to create a scene on our card using pattern paper. Some of the paper packs that I'm going to be using today is the Flower Market, Into the Woods, and Let It Shine. When I am looking for a pattern paper to incorporate into my scene, I will typically look for things like stripes or polka dots, something very subtle. Depending what I'm going to put on the front of my card, for instance, if I'm creating a scene, I don't want that pattern to overtake my main element of my card. So here I found some pattern paper that would work really well for my treehouse. There was a piece of paper that kind of looked like bark, so that is what I used for the main base of my tree. And then for the greenery of the tree, you can see I just used polka dots. I wanted something very subtle. Now for my background, I was looking for a blue type of background because I normally would create or stencil on clouds. But this really pretty light blue paper from the Flower Market pack is going to work great for my background. I also went ahead and die cut out my frame for my door and my window just using some light brown cardstock. And I'm adhering those together right away so I don't lose those in the shuffle on my desk. And don't forget, you can ink blend on top of your pattern paper. You're not limited to just the colors that are there. So I am adding a little dimension to the side of my tree using a blending brush and some walnut ink. When I'm choosing my ink colors, I like to choose something that's a little bit darker than the actual paper. Now for the top portion of my trees, I am using Noble Fir Ink. So once again, this is just a little bit darker than what the color of the paper really is. Now, of course, if you apply more ink or you're really heavy-handed, it's going to be very dark. I just wanted a little bit of color to the edge of each of these pieces. So similar to like if you were to Copic color anything, you would have kind of a shadow area and a highlight area. So my highlight area is going to be in the center of these green pieces. Now pattern paper is usually not very thick, it's pretty thin. So I'm adding stability to these pieces by die cutting them all out again using white cardstock and then attaching them with a tape runner. This is also going to make it a lot easier for me to move this around on the front of the card. Now my tree, the door can open up, but mine's not going to open up, so I'm just applying that tape right over that too. For behind these window pieces, I'm going to take some small pieces of vellum and I'm going to color on a Copic marker, and this is just one of my dark yellows, adding a little bit of that color to the vellum. Then I'm going to take some tape, add it behind my window, and attach the vellum pieces. And this is just kind of a soft yellow look to it, kind of makes it look more lit up, I think. I'm personally done with this portion of the tree, so I'm going to go ahead and get it attached together so that I can kind of move it around on the front of my card when I'm ready. If you were wanting to stamp on it or any type of sentiment that you're going to have on the card, I would do that now before you attach everything together. I'm just adding little dots of liquid glue and adding those on top of each other. Now for this top piece of the tree, I'm adding the liquid glue towards the bottom so that it can kind of slide behind and none of my glue is going to show. So after I have my tree put together, I'm going to start working on another element for my card just to kind of fill in the scene a little bit. And to do that, I am using the straight flower border that I die cut out of Cilantro cardstock. And I have the flower pieces already die cut out from Sunflower, Ballet Slippers, and I believe this is a raspberry cardstock. This border is going to go behind my tree. So there are some flowers I'm not even going to bother attaching the colored pieces to because they're not going to show. And I'm just picking these up with a jewel picker and adding liquid glue on top. Sometimes it's easier for me to pick up these smaller pieces using a jewel picker and having that tackiness to pick up my element versus my tweezers. After I have all of my flowers adhered together, I'm going to attach this to the front of my card, and this is that Flower Market paper that I'm using. So I added tape runner to the bottom, and I'm going to add some liquid glue on the top. That way everything is covered, and then I can line this up with the bottom of my card front and attach that. I'll have a little bit overhanging, so I'll just trim that off with my scissors to make the edges nice and flush. Now, as I put my tree on top of the background, I noticed that the flowers were showing through my vellum, so I just trimmed out some small pieces of white cardstock and added that behind the vellum. I'm not really losing the softness of the vellum. I still really love having that on there with the Copic marker on it, but you could definitely use just some yellow cardstock too. To fill in my scene a little bit more, I'm going to bring in some clouds. I have 3 white clouds that I die cut out of white cardstock, and this is from the Stitched Rainbow, but you could also use those treetops as clouds too. So I just lined a couple of them up on right side and one on the left, and then just trimming off that excess once again. To create a little bit of dimension and to kind of give my background some breathing room here from my tree, I layered the back of my tree with foam squares and adding that over the top and kind of tucking it off on that left-hand side because I have some images that I'm going to be bringing in. I stamped out some images from the Crazy Antics stamp set, and that is on 80-pound white cardstock using the lawnfawn jet black ink. Now for my two little mice, I colored them in some warm grays. So I have W6, W4, and W2, and I'm having the highlight area be in the direction that the mice are facing. For this one that I'm on right now, my darkest color is on the right, and my lightest color is going to be on the left. I'm going to add a little bit of light pink to the belly, the nose, and the ears, and those colors are R32 and R30. Then I'm going to work on the watermelon. So I just did one piece of fruit here. I know the stamp set has lots of different items you could add, but I really liked the watermelon. So I did RV 25, 14, and RV 13, and just a line of G14 for the bottom of the watermelon. Now for my ants, I have BV 29 and BV 23. My mice are going to be sitting on a checkered picnic blanket. So for this, I used R08, R05, and R22. And then I'll do a C1 for the other squares that I want to be white. I just wanted to add a bit of shading to those white squares so they didn't look so stark white. After everything is colored in, I'm going to line up the coordinating dies, hold them down with my Post-it tape, and run these through my die cut machine. Then I can work on assembling the card. So what I like to do when it comes to my images is my mice are going to be sitting on the picnic blanket, so I want to put that kind of grouping together right away. It's just a lot easier for me to manage on the front of the card and know exactly where I can add foam squares. So I did add foam squares to the bottom of the picnic blanket because it overlaps the tree a little bit. And I had to use kind of the regular foam squares, and then there's some very thin foam squares. That gave me just enough lift so it was flush with the tree. And I also added some small foam squares to my ants too. My scene is now complete, and that means I'm going to work on my sentiment, and I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I didn't want to overpower the card with too many items. So this sentiment comes from the Long Distance Hugs stamp set. I stamped the word hugs in jet black ink twice onto 80-pound white cardstock, and then I'm going to use the coordinating die to die cut it out. I'm also going to die cut this out 2 more times from a heavyweight cardstock, just so I can layer it together and add a little bit of dimension underneath my sentiment. So I added liquid glue behind that and added that on the top of my tree. I have a couple finishing touches that I want to add, one of which is using the sparkle glaze and adding that to the center of my flowers. I'm also going to use the Glimmer Pen, and I'm going to add a little bit of that glimmer to my watermelon, and I'm also going to trace over that stamped word hugs. Now this is really hard to see on camera and in the pictures, but in person it is really pretty and sparkly. And then my final finishing touch is going to be taking my white Jelly Roll pen and adding some highlights to my mice and my ants. And that's going to finish off my card project for you today using patterned paper in my scene building. I hope you enjoyed today's card project. Thanks so much for stopping by.